The following program is made possible by Prescott Tire Pros and Automotive Service. Welcome to this episode of the Prescott History Hour. Here we are on Prescott's illustrious Whiskey Row. I'm John Krizik, your host, and with us here today is Brad Courtney, the ultimate historian of Whiskey Row.
And the only one.
The only one.
Makes me unique, I guess.
Brad, when you wrote the book about the history of Whiskey Row, which we did a show about,
Right.
you took us from the 1860s when the thirsty miners came out of the gold hills south of town.
Call it thirst.
Call it thirst.
Not too quenching, but...
To the roaring, if I can call them that, 70s, 80s, 90s around here. But by the time we got to 1900, there was a catastrophic event that changed things forever.
It did. It was the big turning page, the pivotal point in Prescott's history. And some people call it the Big Fire of 1900. I call it the Great Fire of 1900. So that's what we're going to call it today. But yeah, it started here below Goodwin Street at a place called the OK Lodge. And it jumped the street here and it took out this block here, block 13, and all the way down to Cortez Street. But it was pivotal because after the fire lasted about 4 or 5 hours. This was July 14th, 1900, into the morning of July 15th. They finally stopped it. But after this fire, this business district was wiped out, and the people of Prescott really had to choose whether or not to continue the dream they were calling Prescott.
And all of this is new since 1900.
This is a result of the fire. Yeah. Most of these buildings here, if not, there's been some refurbishment, but yeah.
Well, we're going to go and look at a whole bunch of pictures that you've collected and listen to the story of how that fire happened and how Prescott grew like Phoenix from the ashes.
That's exactly. This is the true Phoenix of Arizona.
The true Phoenix of Arizona. So this is the Whiskey Row of the 1890s that disappeared in that great fire of 1900.
Yeah, that was all gone. This is all eaten up right here. You can see on the end. You know it's post 1890s because on the north end there, the far right of the picture, is the Hotel Burke, the only fireproof hotel, absolutely fireproof, by the way, they said, and but it was built in 1892. So there were some changes along the way before it got to 1900. We have an image that shows that, actually. Yeah. We'll get to that point.
So that's the Diana.
That's the Diana Saloon. This is either late 1870s or early 1880s. And the reason I have this image up there is because there was the 1900 fire, which of course wiped out everything. But there were two other conflagrations before that really affected the shape of Prescott and the shape of Whiskey Row. And what I want to show here is...
Well, now that's the corner right where the St. Michael's is today.
Right, and that's called the Diana Saloon, which came in 1868, and then it burned up in 1883.
But that was a real special place because it was the first two-story building, wasn't it?
I think it was the first two-story building, but it was mammoth. I look at it.
Time.
It's about the size of the house I grew up in.
Okay.
But it was in 1868. I called the Diana Saloon the mother of all the Montezuma Street saloons.
Okay.
And what happened here is, there was a big blaze in Prescott, and there we see the headline there, and it says "Whiskey Row licked up by flames." What's interesting about this headline? That is the first time the term, the moniker Whiskey Row, was in print in a Prescott paper.
And what year was this?
1883. They weren't real proud of that. It'd been around probably since 1874, they call it, but for some reason, well, the reason's obvious. They didn't want to have a place known for whiskey and getting drunk and stuff like that. But the fire, I'll show you the image again here, but it says hundreds houseless and homeless. I think what that means is that there was about 75 to 100 people that were unemployed because there weren't a lot of houses to live in right there. But this fire started somewhere. You look halfway down the picture, there's the Cabinet Saloon. It's really kind of hard to point out at this angle. But the fire started in the restaurant portion, hit the Cabinet Saloon. This was early in the morning on July 6th. I figure out the date. It took a little time to figure that out. And it just kept moving up northward. All the fires have a northward direction for some reason.
Because the wind is coming from the south.
That's
probably
where the winds are coming from. And this fire had a little southward movement, which I'll explain, but it burned all the way up to the Diana, but they dynamited the Diana. They brought it down perfectly, and that's where the fire stopped. But you look about halfway down, so that was an empty, it was called the burnout section. And there were a lot of empty lots there, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but that was the Whiskey Row Fire of 1883. And what we have here is, this was called the Sherman Block, and this is actually on Goodwin Street. And
That's,
go ahead.
yeah, that's right about where City
Where the Chamber of Commerce.
Chamber of Commerce is.
Chamber of Commerce is. Yep. Yeah, and this was Sherman House was considered like the first class hotel that Prescott had been calling for years. And to the very left there is actually the original palace, in the sense it's the one that's connected to or related to the palace of today. There was two other palaces which had no relation, so there's been some confusion about the origin of the birth year of the palace. But actually, I give it 1874, which I can talk about there. But let me get you a close up here. There it is. That was called the palace. That's
Right about where the post office is?
Right about there. And as you can tell, the exterior is not much palace-like, but the interior was quite pretentious. I would put it that way. Ostentatious, is that the word I'm looking for? But it was a pretty fancy place. So this palace here was opened on June 23rd, 1883, 2 weeks before the Whiskey Row Fire of 1883. So it became really the go-to place, because many of the other saloons were gone. Were gone, So it became very popular until Valentine's Day. Early on Valentine's Day, the alarms sounded again, and a little bit too much deja vu. And this was only 7 months after the 1883 fire. The Sherman Block was on fire. You see the Sherman House there? And on the right side over here, another defective flue is where the fire started. And these buildings were all wooden. Even the palace was wooden. When the palace was being built, the locals were saying, please, somebody build in brick. But the owner, Nathan Ellis, said, well, when everybody else starts building brick, I will too. But the cheap way to go was with wood, and they paid for that. So this entire block here was wiped out. So the fire moved to the east. You can see J.W. Wilson, that was a clothing store, so that was very flammable. So by the time it hit the palace, there was a inferno. And they were able to pull out a bar, they pulled out a billiard table, they pulled out the piano, and that's all they were able to get out.
And this was when?
This was early on Valentine's Day, 1884.
Okay, 1884.
1884. So now the palace is gone. There's still these empty lots on Montezuma Street.
Okay.
So that's how Whiskey Row moved really over toward Montezuma Street, although Whiskey Row was more than Montezuma Street. And when they rebuilt the cabinet, where you see the palace is right now, that's where the cabinet was. And they rebuilt 2 lots over. And the palace rebuilt where the cabinet was. And sure enough, this time, finally, they built in brick and stone and iron. And these 3 lots here, we start with the cabinet, and then you see the bathhouse and the palace. That's where today's palace sits, because today's palace was a merger of the cabinet and palace saloons.
So today, when you go in the front door of the palace, you're going right where that bathhouse
Yeah, you're going
is in the middle.
Yeah, you're going in where
Okay, I guess
people took baths.
yes, the cowboys and the miners, I guess, needed to clean up before they
Right, went to the palace or the
hit
cabinet.
Whiskey Row.
Which is not a bad idea. I mean, some of them came off the range and the mines,
Yeah.
so they needed to clean up a bit. But
Okay.
I think it's a nice picture of Thumb Butte there in the background. Now this picture here is, I believe, closer to 1900. You see to the left there, Sam Hill's Hardware, which was really a major store, and apparently that's where the phrase "what in the Sam Hill" came from, because he had so many unusual items. They would people would come in and go, "What in the Sam Hill is that?" But you look far to the right there, you see the Hotel Burke has changed its shape. It's now 3 stories. It's quite an impressive hotel. And again, it was the only fireproof hotel in Prescott, so they said. So now we're getting to, how did the fire start? There's been
So this is up to 1900, and then the catastrophe
Then it
happened.
happened. The streets were quite muddy. For some reason, although there was a drought, there was a wet winter, so the roads were real messed up there. But there's been a lot of debate, I guess, over how the fire started, and over the miner's candlestick holder keeps coming up, and I believe that's how it started. It was a miner's candlestick that did the job that
This is the kind of an instrument that a miner would stick into the wall
right
in a mine,
in a mine, a rock wall.
and it would hold a candle
Yeah.
so they could see what they were doing
See
underground.
what they were doing, right. The story that is that I believe is the
Accurate.
most accurate was that there were 4 miners, and to the right you can see the OK Lodging House, and they were lodging in one of the rooms there for $1, 25 cents each.
This is the southwest corner of Montezuma and Goodwin.
The southwest corner, yeah. So what you see here, so today where you see this big building to the right, that was called the Grandview House, but it's most often called the Scopel House. An Italian man named Ferdinand Scopel owned it. But yeah, that's so Sam Hill Cigars sitting there, and you see the courier office on the top there as well, so it was a multi-use kind of a building. But the story that's most told is 4 miners were out partying on the night of July 14th, and apparently so were many other people. The sheriff, George Ruffner, said, if I had to arrest some drunks tonight, I have to put a roof over all of Prescott, and people were really partying. But you can see the Grandview House on the right, and you look below there, at the very bottom, you can see it has a cellar, and that's where the cellar saloon was. So these 4 miners were partying in the cellar saloon. They decided to go back over to the OK Lodging House to the right, and apparently when they got there, this is sometime before 10 o'clock, they figured out that it was a little too early to retire. And at some point, one of the miners jabbed one of those miners' candlestick holders into the wall, and they left. So they left it burning. They must have been a little intoxicated.
A little careless.
And forgot what they were doing there. So what I believe is what this man here, right here, this is Bert Lee. He was actually a volunteer fireman for the OK Company, and this is him 40 years later. But what he said was when the alarms went off, he hurried over to the Prescott pumping station there, which you see there. That's you can see it there. It's on Granite Creek. You can see the hose right there that may have been used for fighting this fire. And he said his company got over there. They got the pump going. They ran the hose over to the OK Lodging House, and according to him, actually ran up the stairs into the OK Lodging House, actually into the room where the blaze had started. Started the pump. About 3 feet of water came out, and a 3-foot stream, I should say, and about 10 gallons, and then mud. And they said if they would have had water, they would have been able to put it out. But he said he saw the candlestick actually on the bed.
But the lack of water might have had something to do. They were pumping out of the creek, and there was not much water in the creek, so it started to get mud.
Yeah. So and I think what you just said there is important because I think there was a little bit of water in Granite Creek, which I'll tell you why in a little bit. But there was also a company across the street here. There was wells on each, the plaza's right across the way there, kitty corner, and there was a well right there, and another company hooked up there, and same thing, a little bit of
not enough water
came out to.
So the fire is burning in the OK lodging house over there on the left in this picture.
Right.
And the wind is blowing from the south, which is
and west,
coming from the left, blowing to the right.
Right. And so they started dynamiting, and the building in between the OK lodging house and the OK annex, I believe it was blown up, to try to take away the fuel of this fire.
So dynamiting was a technique to eliminate the fuel.
Eliminate the fuel, correct.
Okay.
So the big mistake here, now we're looking at the Grandview house on the right side here, also the Scopel Hotel. They decide to blow up the Grandview house, and I don't know if they had any experience of what would happen if you tried to blow up a brick building. But what happened was they set the dynamite, it blew. No deaths were reported except in the Arizona Republican. But according to the Arizona Republican, which it was called the Phoenix paper, there was a man on top here when they were getting ready to blow, and he was standing on the top, and they got a ladder for him to get him down, and they were begging him to get down, and according to the paper, he just maniacally laughed, fell back into the fire, and was burned up. So according to the Arizona Republican, there was one death, So anyway, they dynamited it, but it kind of acted like a cannon, and according to one eyewitness, he said the masonry stood firm. And this picture here is interesting because you see to the left and the top, you can see where the masonry actually...
It held.
It held. And
this is from the plaza.
This is from the plaza, yeah.
Okay.
Looking south and west there. So we're getting this is a few days later. They're getting ready to set up camp on the plaza there. So, but what happened is the Grandview house acted kind of like a cannon. The embers flew over toward Granite Street to the west, and that's when it hit the Union Saloon, and then you see this is famous because of the cribs you can see to the right.
Okay, now this is the corner right north of the football field there.
This is right, directly across from the football field.
And you can see the top of the old courthouse in the distance there on the right.
Right. And you can see it's all wood. So the embers hit the Union Saloon. So that was kind of a new discovery for me that the fire actually approached Montezuma Street from behind.
It jumped Goodwin Street over here. Okay.
Yeah, and it went to the left, south, north and west, and so Granite Street caught on fire, and right behind the Union Saloon, a little to the right there, was Sam Hill's Hardware. But you can see what it did there. What we're looking at is Granite Street and then a little bit of Montezuma Street there. You can see how both are wiped out. The reason we got this photo image up there is you can see Chinatown. I always thought Chinatown filled up, the Block 100 portion of Granite Street, but it looks like you can see where it starts right there, then goes down past Goodwin Street, past exactly where the football field is today and the school. So the Chinese were able to prevent their area from going up in flames because, according to Gil Gardner, he said they got their mattresses, soaked them in Granite Creek, put them on top there along with blankets. They soaked everything they could, and so when the embers blew over their way, it landed on wet mattresses, and So they saved their place. But you can see to the left there, you can see what's left of Sam Hills, and see what I got there. There's, of course, what Sam Hills looked like.
Before the fire. And of course,
Before
being
the
a
fire.
hardware store, it was full of stuff that was flammable.
Ammo.
Yeah.
You can see here in the thing, they're firearms, so they had all kinds of flammable stuff. Oils.
Okay.
So when it hit Sam Hills, things went haywire. That's where the fire picked up its momentum right there and hit the Montezuma Street.
So it
part of
really,
Whiskey Row.
it really blew up along Whiskey Row.
Yeah, and Sam Hill was out of town, so he didn't have time to get stuff out. The fire was, hit it that quick. So he had the biggest loss, actually. He had $80,000 worth of $80,000 loss, and I think that's like $2 million in today's terms. So, yep, that's when it really started taking off and
So the fire at this point is moving north.
moving north. And according to one eyewitness, when barrels of whiskey or barrels of oil or ammo, when the fire hit, it was actually spectacular scenery.
Yeah.
Spectacular sight there. So, yeah, up it goes toward the cabinet. And we have the cabinet interior there. It was one of the establishments that was dynamited. And you can see the back bar, and then right next to it, to the right, is a ice box, and that's where they put 25 pounds of.
And this was one of the hottest places in town. on
Between
Whiskey
the
Row.
palace and the cabinet, yeah, they were the places.
Okay.
Yeah, they were in competition with each other.
So this went.
Yeah, so it blew up. Barney Smith was one of the proprietors, and he noticed when they came in with dynamite, they said, "What are you going to do with that?" He said, "We're going to put it in your ice box and blow up your place." And he goes, "That's be damn bad for the ice box." So the cabinet was blown up there, and now it's heading toward the palace. They just couldn't get the fire to stop. It had too much momentum. And there we see the interior of the palace, and we'll talk more about that later. But we see the back bar there. My belief now is that the back bar there was also pulled out but replaced, and the ice box there. I believe that's the ice box. I think that's the ice box that's in the palace today.
Okay, we're going to take a little break here. But that story of that bar being saved,
Is my favorite.
that's a story that we've heard for years, and we're going to get into that detail right after the break, and we'll be right back with more of the story of the Great Fire of 1900 in Prescott, Arizona. This program has been made possible by Prescott Tire Pros and Automotive Service. Welcome back to this session of the Prescott History Hour. I'm John Krizek, your host, and with us today is Brad Courtney, our ultimate historian on Whiskey Row.
At least Whiskey Row, yeah.
And we're going to get to the continuing story of the Great Fire of 1900. First, let me explain to people that this picture behind us here of the intersection of Montezuma and Gurley, we think was taken about 1905, after things have been built up. You can see St. Michael's there and so forth. And there's no cars, but there are a couple of wagons. Anyway, that's what you're looking at when you're not watching the story of the Great Fire.
Well, we're back to, I think this is a pretty extraordinary image here. And I think this image is taken from probably Granite Street, looking over at Montezuma, probably after the fire started dying down some, because some of the descriptions of what the fire looked like was, it probably be twice of what you're seeing here. And I think what you're seeing across the way there, behind the flames is probably Cortez Street, and to the right you can see a taller building, which may be the courthouse.
See, at this point, the city is basically on fire, and there's all sorts of panicky things going on.
There's all kinds of things going on. There was one witness who said that actually it was so bright that the chickens came out of their roost, and the roosters were crowing because they thought it was morning.
And this is during the night?
During the night, yeah. So, and this witness actually lived over on Cortez, and they had chickens, and he said the rooster came out crowing. Another man said you could read a newspaper from as far away as Mount Vernon. It was so, and there was just, the noise was incredible. You know, barrels of whiskey were blowing up, barrels of dynamite were blowing up. There was, the dynamiting was going on, but some people described it as quite an amazing sight, that they could see the countryside, they could see the mountains, you know. So
hell on earth.
Yeah.
Okay, so what happened then?
So moving up toward the Hotel Burke on the corner of Montezuma and Goodwin, and I put this ad in there that it ran week after week after week. The first time I saw the ad, I looked at it and I read, "It is the only absolutely fireproof hotel in Prescott," and I just started laughing because I knew the end of the story. I knew the punchline. Back to this photo there, you can see to the right the Hotel Burke, and the hope was at the time that they decided not to dynamite the Hotel Burke because they were relying on the belief that it was fireproof, and they were hoping the fire would stop there. But it had the fire was so great, there was no stopping it. They even said it created its own weather. It had its own
windstorm. Yeah.
Yep. So it hit the Hotel Burke and just ate it alive, and so now it's hit Gurley Street, and the hope was it wouldn't cross, but directly across the street on Gurley Street was the Kelly and Stevens store, which had flammable stuff. It jumped, and Kelly and Stevens store was on fire, and it was hoped that, you know, maybe the only reason it turned east is because on the corner, where right around where the atrium is now, there was a barn there full of flammable material, and the conflagration, the inferno, was so hot, just the heat itself ignited this barn across the street from Montezuma, where the Brinkmeyer Hotel was, and the Gurley Street portion of the plaza area, it was attacked from behind as well. So that's how it turned to the right, and now it's heading toward Cortez. So it's heading toward Cortez, and on the corner of Cortez and Gurley was a drugstore owned by a man named Harry Breesley, who actually had a place in the Hotel Burke as well. But the fire was moving toward it. There was in between there was a liquor store owned by Jake Marks, who was a really popular fellow, but he had full of whiskey, and one of his employees said, "Don't you think, Jake, we ought to take out get the liquor out?" And he goes, "Nah, we'll just start drinking, and we'll never get this fire out."
This is at the corner of
Gurley and Cortez. Across the street, the Bank of Arizona was going through some refurbishments and had a pile of lumber there, and it was about ready to catch on fire. And Harry Brisley saw this, and then he saw a soda fountain. So he pulled it over there, and he sprayed carbonated water all over it, and that was how he was able to stop it. So I wanted to say this. You know how they said the wells were dry?
Yeah.
Well, the story is, this came out later, I found this, you know, many of the stories came out after the fire, because after the fire they weren't talking about what had happened during the fire, they were talking about rebuilding. So years later, the city water engineer said that he actually got up to the reservoir on where Mount Vernon is, released the water down into the wells of the plaza, so there was water there, except people just didn't realize it, except on this, what would it be, the northeast corner of the plaza, there was formed a 100-man bucket brigade, so they saw the water there. And these two boys across the street on The east side of Cortez was a row of buildings called Office Row. And they never had a problem mentioning Office Row. It was just Whiskey Row they had a problem with mentioning it all the time. But there was a hotel called the Bellevue House. These two boys climbed on top, and when the embers would fly across the west side of Cortez over to the east side of Cortez, the buildings there, the men would hand them a bucket of water, and these boys were quick of feet and brain, and they were able to douse the embers so that otherwise the whole town might have gone up to the east there. So these boys kept on going down the way there, and they were lauded as heroes. And when the fire ended, they told them, "You can go on home, boys." So,
Okay.
One of my favorite stories that some of the men who fought the fire got a big kick out of happened as the fire was moving north toward the Hotel Burke, and of course the businesses wanted to get their inventory out into the plaza so they would have something to work with or something to sell when the fire was done. And Harry Brisley was a pharmacist, and he was one of the key eyewitnesses of the fire. I think he saw that fire from almost beginning to end. I know he saw it when they tried to put it out there in the corner where the Scopel and Grandview House was. But as the fire was moving north, Harry Brisley had a drugstore. He had two drugstores actually, but he had a drugstore in the Hotel Burke, kind of probably where the St. Michael's Alley is today. And he was getting out his inventory, and along came this lady, probably a professional. In other words, a prostitute.
Whatever that means.
Yeah. Anyway, she didn't have a lot of inhibition, and her method of helping, and she was a great help, was she'd run over to the drugstore, lift her skirt up, the men would load it up. She'd run over to the plaza, and then she'd dump the
contents,
the stuff, and she'd run back, lift her skirt up again, and somehow this stood out in the minds of the men. That was this little entertainment.
A little entertainment in the middle of the fire.
While they were
But
fighting.
it was part of the scramble that went on during this fire to save stuff.
Yeah, and that plaza was just full of stuff that they would use later, so they could stay in business while they're rebuilding.
Well, you told another story about how, with the fire bearing down on them, the bar owners offered free beer.
Yep, Barney Smith actually yelled to everybody, "Come and get it!" and didn't have to ask twice. So they'd run in and grab the barrels of whiskey and beer or whatever, the bottles of whiskey and whatever, and they'd go back out to the plaza. And there was a lot of looting that went on as well too, of course.
Yeah, but
some things never
so
changed.
the fire is bearing down up Whiskey Row, and the patrons of the bars are trying to help out. They're
trying to help.
They're helping out by reducing the inventory a little bit.
Yeah.
But there was manpower on the scene to drag stuff out across the street.
Right.
What a scene.
The whiskey just didn't.
What a scene.
It's one of those things that didn't last, though, for some reason. And the beer just didn't last. Yeah, so the fire, about 4:30 a.m., finally ended. And, of course, everybody was exhausted. And somebody announced that on the plaza, the proprietors of the Cabinet and Palace Saloons, Bob Brow for the Palace and Ben Belcher and Barney Smith for the Cabinet, that they were offering free beer on the plaza for anybody who fought the fire. And Harry Brisley said that that's some of the best words I've ever heard in my life, free beer. And apparently the days following, as they started to rebuild and put up Tent City there, the beer was still free. And, there are all kinds of reports about how cheerful the people were, even after this great catastrophe in Prescott. And a man who worked at the Sam Hill's hardware store said, well, there was a good reason for that. His last name was Greenwood, William Greenwood. He said, well, people were happy because 2 words: whiskey, beer, and
How to fight a
People's-
fire.
yeah.
How to fight a fire.
and how to rebuild a city. Just put
And-
whiskey and beer out there. So they were having a good time. All
So that's how Whiskey Row revived itself in 1900.
whiskey and beer.
That's great.
So the fire's heading down toward
The train station.
yeah. So on Sheldon, and this is actually I was able to find an actual picture of the depot, but you can see the trains to the left there, and the people there were concerned about important documents and et cetera being catching fire, so they loaded up the train, had them ready to go. But
So they were loading documents of value and so forth
Yeah.
onto railroad cars
yeah.
in case they had to.
in case they
get 'em
had
outta here.
Yeah, but they were
Okay.
able to stop with the fire to stop. They kept dynamiting. Finally,
So the fire did not get that far north.
it hit as far as Willis Street, and we have some pictures that actually show that. So the fire, it was about 4:30 in the morning, and they dynamited one more saloon, and that stopped it. So the fire it took about 5 hours to fight it. So we have some images here of the aftermath. So let's take of that. But here's this map here actually showed up in the Arizona Republic, Phoenix Republican, it was called at the time, that showed the area where the fire had wiped out. But there are a couple mistakes I discovered. You can see it started to the left there. You can see the OK Lodging House. Took out the 100 block there, block 13. You can see how it swerves up north of Chinatown and up. I don't believe the fire went that far.
Across Gurley Street.
Yeah, I don't think, because
Yeah.
we'll see pictures that
But it got all the way up to Willis,
Willis.
and it
I-
got all the way over to Cortez,
Yeah,
but the buildings on the other side of Cortez were saved.
the other side of Willis. Yeah, the other side
And
of
the other
Willis.
side of Cortez here.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Look at the lumber yard there to the right there. That lucky you didn't hit there. But yeah, first to report the fire was not Prescott papers were wiped out. The Miner and the Courier were wiped out, so it was outside newspapers
Outside
that reported.
reporting.
So there were some mistakes.
Okay.
So this is an 1897 photo of a Prescott. So this is what it looked like, pretty close to what it looked like at the time
This
before the
must
fire.
have been taken from the hill up there where the Pioneer Home is.
That's what I think. Yep.
And in the distance back there, well, you can not only see the courthouse, but you can see the Catholic Church
Right.
with the steeple in the distance over there to the left.
To the left, yeah, it's still there, right?
Which is still there today as the theater.
Right, right. What was it called? Sacred Heart or something like that.
Well, it's
But,
the Sacred Heart Church then, and it's the PCA now.
This photo is really, and it'd be fun to sit there and pinpoint what I could see.
Yeah.
The Union Saloon, and you can see all kinds of stuff there. The
And that's
Grandview
before.
House.
This is before the fire.
So after the fire, well, it looked a lot flatter. Picture taken almost from the same location. You can see so many buildings are gone. The courthouse still standing, but it really altered things, didn't it?
Yeah. Awesome.
So we got a picture. Now we're looking north from probably the courthouse.
This is from the old courthouse looking north
right.
across
You can where the
Gurley
Brinkmeyer,
Street.
yeah, the Brinkmeyer's gone. So yeah, this is the corner of Montezuma and Gurley there. You can see the
extent of the devastation. The gazebo is down in the
Think of the
corner there.
Right there,
on the
yeah.
left.
And you
It,
see
it survived.
there's a different version of it today, but that's what it looked like at the time. So there's always been something there, like a gazebo.
Yeah.
But the also thing you can notice here too, it's when I first started researching all this, many times they said Prescott was all because Prescott was a town of wood and every building was made of wood. But you can see a lot of the brick
Yeah.
remnants still standing.
Some
So
things survived.
there was plenty of brick at the time, but the fire was so great it just
Yeah.
took that out too. This image here is this, where you see the Phoenix Saloon there, that is right about where the Mile High football field is now. And you can see the church steeple again there. We can see the tents going up. So we're actually looking at the western portion of
Goodwin.
right, of the 100 block, they call it, or block 13.
Okay.
And if you look real close, you can see the back end of the palace still standing there with the brick. And now we are looking.
This is looking straight west
straight
across
west, yeah.
Montezuma.
And this, look at all the
But look at the
debris,
ashes.
yeah.
I mean, this is totally burned. You can see by the tree line in the distance along the creek
yeah.
that the fire did not go that far.
Did not cross that far. So that's where the map kind of
Yeah.
had an
Boy,
error there.
Look at it. It totally leveled that section of Whiskey Row.
You can still see the debris in the street from the buildings being
Yeah.
dynamited. There was still some left, and Tent City slowly going up at this point there.
Okay.
Now we're moving north up. Look at the debris in this image.
And there's the facade of the palace in the background there to the right.
And I believe, I forget the name of that other brick building there, but just to the right of it, that's where the cabinet sat, and it was blown up. And then the bathhouse. So a little bit of the palace stood. We'll get a closer look at that in a minute, but it's just amazing to me.
Yeah.
You might even see that in this picture, it's kind of hazy. There might be some smoke
It's
still
still
there.
smoldering at this point.
So this was taken, especially when you see all the debris out on the road there. This was taken probably shortly after the fire. It's pretty much the same location there, but Tent City is.
Yeah, again, you can see that facade of the palace across the street.
Yeah.
But the Tent City is emerging on the plaza.
Right. Probably the double tent there you see is probably where the cabinet saloon's set up. To the left there, you can see it's kind of wooden. That's probably where Robert Brow put up his temporary saloon, which we have an image of coming up here. But
So the merchants downtown wasted no time in getting back in business
yes,
across the street from where the fire had burned them out.
some reports I've seen the next day they were getting things back in order there. And to the right, you can see what's left of the Hotel Burke, a little bit there. And now we're looking northward again there. Now you can see what's left of the palace, including the back end there. There was a dining room. You can see to the right, it's kind of like a square part of the building there. There was a dining room back in that area and a kitchen. So and then you see.
And this would have been about where the St. Michael's is today.
Exactly
on the right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what you see there, you see these boys who were given a certain amount of money to stack these bricks, and they were paid by the brick. And one of the guys grew up later and said there was a lot of theft going on from one stack of bricks to the other. Boys would sneak bricks over to their pile. But yeah, that is they're getting the bricks ready to rebuild the Hotel Burke there.
I'll be darned. They're collecting bricks.
Collecting bricks. You can see that one boy there. He's got an eye on.
Yeah.
Okay. They're the boys' bricks.
All right.
And now, I think this.
Now this is the Tent City across Montezuma.
Yeah.
And you can see the old courthouse there on the right.
And I think this is pretty extraordinary. If you do some close-ups, you can see there's the headquarters saloon. This is like one fellow said that the only time the plaza had businesses set up on it there, and that kind of use, because it was set aside for just public use.
And this is
place to
still
hang out.
the fire was on July 14th.
Yeah.
So this is probably just a few days later.
Yeah, probably here more than a few days, because you see everything. You can even see. We'll get to the. This took a little while. I don't think it went up that fast, but this is where if you're coming from the south and you'd be driving onto Whiskey Row.
And Montezuma, by the way, is a dirt street.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
So here's another view.
Look at the
from the other direction.
construction in the plaza.
Yeah, we have wooden buildings and
Probably within weeks of the fire in 1900.
yeah, they wanted to get things back in order very quick. So yeah, and then they had the job of putting back together the more beautiful than ever, of what was there before.
Yeah.
You can see the Cabinet Saloon there, Belch and Smith, and one of those is probably the Palace Saloon there.
Yeah.
And now we get to
Now tell us, who is Bob Brow?
Bob Brow was the proprietor of the Palace, which was just north of the Cabinet Saloon. We've seen
Yeah.
picture of that. So Bob Brow got his place back in shape there, and you can't see all of it on this, but it said Bob Brow Saloon and not ashamed of it. So. And you look in there, I've done closest of it, and sure enough, you can see the famous Palace Bar.
So when you look closely at the details of what's inside the door,
Yes,
you're seeing the bar.
the bar that was put in there in 1897, which I will talk about. Another thing I wanted to say is when they pulled out the bar, they pulled out the back bar, but they pulled out the whiskey. That's a lot of men were more concerned about getting that whiskey out there, and the beer. They pulled out a piano, and the piano player came out into the plaza. His name was Ed Wilson, I believe, and he started playing the popular tune at the time. There's a hot time in the old town tonight.
It was a hot time in the. So this has all been, the fire itself happened at night.
Yeah,
When it started, the bars were still open.
yeah,
So there's an approaching fire, and the customers at the Palace decided to save the bar
yep.
and drag it across the street.
Drag it across the street with the whiskey and the beer, and they kept more than one report. Is the guy, the piano player, kept singing. There was a soprano lady who kept singing it, and apparently when everybody was singing, it caught on, and you could hear all the way from Granite Street, Cortez, people were singing that song. So
It sounds like people singing on the Titanic.
yeah, except yeah, they
Well,
were.
now how do we know that bar actually came out of the Palace Saloon as we know it today?
And we're going to find out.
There's another picture you've got that
There we
shows
go. Oh yeah,
the bar.
there it is.
Now this was taken about what year?
Well, it had to be after December 1897, because when the report of the new bar being built after the palace had burned down in 1897,
So the fire of 1897 was
just within the
just
palace.
within
Yeah,
the palace.
just within the palace. And when they installed it, they
had to recondition the bar or rebuild that.
well, they got
bar.
a brand new bar.
They got a
They
brand
got
new
a brand
bar.
new bar that probably came from San Francisco around the Baja and up. This fire occurred in November, and by December they had the bar.
So if we can zoom in on that bar right there,
Without a doubt.
that matches the bar that's there
Without a doubt.
today.
Right. And I believe the icebox to the right there. And I believe they pulled out, you can see the back bar in the back. I believe they pulled it out but replaced it, is my belief.
Okay. But that bar, one of the reasons you know it was that bar was because of the type of wood they used.
Right. Yeah.
Because when they built the new bar, it has a cherry wood top.
Exactly. And that was described in the report.
So the best you've been able to discover is that is the bar.
I don't have a doubt. I have no doubt at all. And when we go to the Palace Saloon, I'll tell you how I discovered very late in my research, even when I had the book written, I thought I was going to have to say, no, It
was just a myth.
yeah, it's a myth, but turns out it was true.
Well, I would say congratulations, Brad Courtney, for finding out that one of our favorite stories about Whiskey Row was really true.
Thank God.
And I think we should all go down and put our elbows on that bar and have a drink in celebration that Prescott rose from the fire.
Twist my arm, I'll go.
Okay. So this is the bar.
This is the bar.
So Brad, how did you discover or find out that this is really the bar that got hauled across the street?
How I found out that the legend is actually true. Well, it's a good story. It's a historiographical journey. Hope we can use that
nice
word.
word.
It makes
yeah.
me sound smart. But yeah, when I first decided to research the history of Whiskey Row, that was one of the first legends I heard. And as I was researching, there were some of these legends that I was going, oh my gosh, that's not exactly the way it actually happened, So I was debunking a lot of the legends, or revising them, I should say. And the one I didn't want to debunk the most was the story about this bar being pulled out. And when I first got here, a lot of the local historians, I would say almost all of them, believed that was a myth about this bar being pulled out. There's no documentation of it. And sure enough, after the fire, it was not in the newspapers that this bar was pulled out. So I was writing my book, I was near the end, I was actually like in the third stage of editing for it, and I had already written that this legend is probably not true. I wasn't sure. And it was about 2 o'clock one night, I was laying in bed, and my wife was asleep, and I just started researching something else, and I was looking at a Arizona Miner of 1897 or something, and I came across another fire. And I was going, how in the world did I miss this fire? There's so many different fires. But the fire was actually only inside the palace. The palace at the time was next door, in the next lot over to the north. And it talked about this fire, how it was contained because they had built with brick and stone and iron, and it was contained, but it took out the inside of the palace. And this was in November 1897. They kept doing reports of how the, what's the word I'm looking for, rebuilding was going on. And I came across, when it was starting to get finished, it was about ready to reopen, and it was a December 28th, 1897 Miner, and they reported that the new bar had been put in, and it had the cherry top. In other words, the description of the bar was this bar, and I got so excited. My wife was asleep.
This is a cherry wood top.
Yeah, yes, cherry and mahogany.
Yeah.
It was made of, but the description matched up perfectly, and I was ecstatic. And I woke my wife up and goes, "It's true, it's true, it's true." And I ran in the next day because I was kind of hinting at that the legend's probably not true. A friend of mine, Martha here, who's now a part owner, was bartending, and I could not wait to tell her that it was true, so I brought the evidence in.
Okay, now how do you suppose they actually got this bar across the street?
Bar across the street. So we should say at this point that during the Great Fire of 1900, the bar was pulled out to the plaza, and so it was probably this ice box over here, and probably the bottom part of the back bar. You look at it, they kind of match up as far as the way they've aged. But it's a matter of guesswork because it was just kind of oral history.
Yeah.
And there's been several different versions. One is there was just enough men in here and they got under it. Maybe they, like you said,
They might have put rollers under it
to
and
get it out.
pulled it with horses or enough manpower.
Right.
But they got this bar across the street before the fire consumed the palace.
And they had to hurry because
Yeah.
it was coming fast. And they were
Yeah.
dynamiting along the way. But Yeah, there's been horses have been given credit for it. I saw one story about how oxen, they hooked up oxen, pulled it out, but they got it out there some way.
Well,
and then
that
they
was a
reinstalled
heroic deed. They saved the bar.
Oh, yeah.
And we can tell our visitors today that this bar is the same one that was hauled across the street in 1900.
Not a doubt in my mind. Yep.
Great.
And they took the whiskey too. I thought that was really
They
heroic.
had to save the whiskey,
Yeah. I mean,
of course.
That's heroic.
Absolutely. After all, it's Whiskey Row.
It's Whiskey Row. It's
Okay,
What's
good.
Whiskey Row without whiskey?
When it comes to fires around here, we had a scare in 2012 when a fire started, I believe, in the kitchen of the birdcage, which was right over here, and 3 buildings were lost, but that's all. And out of that, we gained this holiday courtyard, which is a very nice place for events right in the middle of Whiskey Row. So that's the story of the big fire of 1900 that changed this town forever. When it comes to preserving this history around here, we're very grateful to the owners of the Palace Saloon, which is basically like a museum,
Living history
a
museum.
living history museum.
Right. Yeah, and that credit starts with Dave Michelson 20-some years ago, who decided to make it that way, and then Scott Stanford came along and added to it, and now it's switched owners to Dennis and Derry and Scott and Martha, and I'm looking forward to seeing what the future of the palace is going to be like.
And we will do our part to uphold the traditions at that bar.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. Drinking whiskey and whiskey
Okay.
row. Yep.
All right, now, when it comes to the book that you wrote, The History of Whiskey Row, this is available in certain stores around here,
Several
right?
places, yeah. Some people say you can buy it at Costco, but that's, I don't know about that. But yeah, there's the Old Sage right over here in St. Michael's Alley, the Paragon. And if you want a signed copy, you can always email me at whiskeyrowbooks@gmail.com and if you want a signed copy.
So that's the existing book. You're going to write another book now
Right. It's going to focus around the Great Fire.
around the Great Fire.
And there'll
Okay.
be some improvements to
Okay.
what was done in this book.
All right. Anyway, it's a fun story to tell. Thank you for being with us for this episode of the Prescott History Hour.
When you hear the bells go ting-ling-ling,